So my name's Ben Fleay. I work with the business is called Precision Ag. Unfortunately, the industry is also called Precision Ag, so it's confusing. I must thank the business founders for doing that to us anyway. So they're quite often explaining it's the industry and it's the business. So my colleague and Sebastian, who's I think in the other room networking hopefully at the moment. So, but no, thanks again for this afternoon. So basically, I'll just run through who we are and what we do, and maybe some of our thoughts in this space. So basically, we're an independent business, so we've been around for about 10 years. We're all about sort of data collection, data analysis and advice to farmers. We work with around 600 farmers up and down the eastern seaboard. We've got offices in Toowoomba in southern Queensland, Temora just north of Wagga, Ballarat and Rutherglen. So from Ballarat we service Western Victoria, Tassie, South Australia, Kangaroo Island, where Lynn is. And so basically, and that's across a mix of broadacre livestock producers, increasingly horticulture and viticulture, where probably some of these concepts make even more sense, where they're trying to produce more from less. When ultimately our sort of purpose in life is to try and help farmers and their consultants understand their constraints and then work around that to improve. So for us, it's very much not about the technology. The technology is a key part of what we do, but that's largely just an enabler to try and ensure that you can see these things through to being actioned, if you like. So as mentioned, and I think it's been a bit of a theme for the last couple of days, which is really good. It's all about, in our experience over the last 10 years, through lots of mistakes and fumbling around and making plenty of errors over the years, it's largely all about the use cases. So trying to understand, what are the core objectives, what are you trying to achieve? And really, in what we do, there's two or three core things. It's common sense really when you think about it, but it's just trying to increase productivity. So that's basically trying to understand your underlying variation across your paddock, within paddocks, what's driving that, and then removing those constraints. There's improving your input use efficiency. So essentially just getting, applying your resources, whether they're lime and gypsum, whether it's fertiliser, whether it's herbicide, whether it's seed, whether it's insecticide. But I suppose, being able to make more informed decisions around where those inputs are applied, and so I guess being more efficient. Quite often you see savings in doing so. And then lastly, which is I guess becoming increasingly more important, is the environment, I suppose. And funnily enough, we find that's what's maybe one of the few situations where it can be win-win, where you're placing inputs where they're most needed. Invariably, that you're seeing less losses to the environment because you're not applying products where they're already adequate or surplus to requirements. And so I think certainly when seeing this firsthand in areas that are close to waterways and other sensitive areas where there's obviously increasing pressure on farmers in those areas to probably play a stronger role. So we think this whole PA sort of world has a role to play to hopefully help farmers in a more sustainable way address some of these environmental concerns. I think one of the challenges we see, and probably increasingly so, is just this proliferation of data. So and obviously, in the last couple of days, which has been fantastic anyway. But invariably, there's a lot more and more data being collected, stored in the cloud, and I think for a lot of farmers that we deal with can be daunting. So it's just where do you start? Just a few examples there about a whole range of data sets that are just being collected either by the farmer, by the machinery they're using, by contractors they're engaging with, and inevitably, it's all going to the cloud, and quite often, unless the farmers and their consultants have got a clear sort of understanding or purpose as to why that data is being collected, quite often, sometimes people sort of almost, are paralysed into a decision or indecision, if you like, and nothing happens. So I think that's why, once again, in our experience, just keeping the objectives and the use cases sort of front of mind, and then within reason, the data you need to go and collect, if you like, just takes care of itself. But if the data overtakes that decision, then invariably, things start to come unstuck. So I guess probably just to reaffirm that point. So I mean, our experience, which I think probably is, you know, a lot of other people in this sector would also, work along this proviso. So our mantra is data, insight, and action. So largely, it's all around, you know, ground truthing the data that gets collected, and then from that, deriving an action. So once again, it's understanding the issue. For example, I've got acid soils. What do? We're going to collect some more data. In this instance here, it's either using an appropriate sensor or taking a soil sample to better understand the prevalence of acidity within your paddock or your farm. The local insights are crucial. I think, as Michael said this morning from Elders, around the importance of working with your advisors, the local agronomist, your own local experience on farm, you know, is really important to ground truth the data that gets collected, and then ultimately, once you've got the data, glean some insights, and then it's building an action that then addresses that issue. So for example, I've got acid soils. Take some more soil tests, work with the agronomist to understand what lime rates to use to address those issues, and then we create a prescription file, if you like, so a map that can be then applied using the contractor or the farmer's own equipment, basically just on a stick, to then address that issue. So I guess it's trying to, as best you can, try and you know, provide an end-to-end solution. Sometimes it comes unstuck, I think, where the probably just reflecting the last couple of days, our experience is there's of course farmers who like playing around with technology, but not that many in the scheme of things. I think most farmers invariably prefer a solution given their time and resource poor. So we probably try and deliver largely a turnkey solution that, you know, within reason you can solve the issues and you don't have to intervene too much, otherwise it sometimes can fall over. So where do you start? So I suppose that's just an example of if you can see it appropriately. So it's just, you know, once again, this is just running through a few examples about using technology to address soil acidity, and this is just an example about here. Historically, if most farmers, whether they're cropping, pasture, doesn't matter, but if they're in soils with low pH, so are acidic, and then quite often they'll just have a view that there's an average pH that sits across paddock. We conduct a lot of soil tests, and the grey bars here basically are how much the pH varies within each paddock. So quite often you see range from the low 4s, which are highly acidic, and obviously you're going to be constraining to production, up to the 6s and 7s, which are obviously alkaline and are perfectly fine. So I guess in collecting the data for a purpose, you start to understand how much, in this instance here, how much your soil acidity can vary, not just across a farm, but within a paddock. In terms of some of the technology, so we've just as an example about what we've done, so we introduced what was called the Verus technology into Australia back in 2010. So that was a sensor-based pH reader, if you like, that we ran for 3 or 4 years. We've actually then replaced that sensor now with a physical soil sampler. So we've actually gone back to the dark ages to some degree. And the reason being is, and this I think is just a lot of internal R&D that companies go and do sometimes. You go up some dry gullies sometimes. We found that particular technology wasn't accurate. So I think it's important sometimes to learn those lessons firsthand anyway, and then I suppose that's just internal process improvement and ultimately just trying to get a better outcome, because I think certainly where in our experience where there's practice change taking place, so farmers are making a significant shift to what they otherwise used to do, you need to make sure obviously your internal processes have integrity and the data you're producing is correct, and farmers can rely on those to make decisions. So in this instance here, we actually went back to a physical soil sampler. But basically, in this instance here, I suppose this is more a definition of utilising some smart ag as opposed to sensor technology. But in effect, it's a rapid soil collection. We just, in this instance here, we're just taking a series of soil cores across individual grids across a paddock. Then once again, it's through the process is, those soil samples are bagged with barcodes, scanned, sent to the laboratory and so forth. So it's sort of a seamless workflow to get from the paddock to the lab. And I suppose just going back a step, the traditional and still very much a common process for soil testing Australia-wide is, farmers and agronomists would collect a soil sample in what's called a transect. So given that paddock there, you might drive across from one corner to the other, take perhaps half a dozen or to 10 soil cores. That all going together into one bag. That would then be the soil test for that paddock, and from which you then derive a range of results from the lab, if you like, and that would potentially be your nutrient program for the coming year. So that we then try and apply some more rigour to that process. And you can see here on the other side of the just jump ahead. On the other side of the page there is that's that same paddock, but this time it's broken down into individual grids, if you like. So these are just georeferenced areas within the paddock. And instances here, this is a 2 hectare grid. So there's the paddocks broken down into individual 2 hectare grids, and then soil tests are taken within each grid. Then once again, so instead of actually an individual soil test, so each grid has a soil test result that's returned. So this example here is just for pH. So there's ends up being about 62, I think, individual soil tests versus the one that would normally be taken for that one paddock anyway. So, and consequently, you can start to get a better understanding about how much things can vary, not just across farms, but within paddocks. And there's obviously a whole range of reasons why that might be the case. It could be the underlying characteristics of the soil. It could be management practices. It could be fertiliser history. It could be stocking history. It could be everything. So there's a whole range of reasons, obviously, which you as the farmer and your agronomist will best understand, having managed the farm for a period of time. So, but it starts, I suppose, to tell a story once you've got the data collected, and then it's processed and then contoured, and you can start to see the trends that happened across paddocks. So in this instance here, you can see the top end of the paddock there in the red there, that's highly acidic, versus the bottom end there in the blue and yellows, which are quite alkaline. So already there's obviously some trends emerging. In this instance here, no doubt there'll be reasons behind that. So, but previously, if the average is 5.2, which is not a poor result, quite often you might think that's the number you're trying to address, as opposed to from 4.2 to 7. And so then this is just a matter of just once again starts from what's the issue, what data needs to be collected to understand the issue, the consultation, which is the ground truthing from the farmer and their agronomist. So they then work with their elders agro on what's the target pH. So what's the major constraint to try and maximise your pasture growth in that paddock, or your cropping growth and the crop yields in that paddock. Are you working on say a 5.2 or a 5.5 target pH, and from which then you also then derive your liming rates across paddocks. So you can see here, once again, from based on the pH that was tested previously, you end up with a whole range of rates from 0, so no limes applied, all the way to 4 tonnes per hectare. So obviously, once again, this just goes down to just the spatial variation that you can better understand by taking some more measurements in the best form possible, and then applying some rigour to the results, and then you end up with an application, I suppose, that hopefully starts to address some of those issues in the paddock. Equally, and this probably goes to the last couple of days around the connectivity. So one of the biggest challenges we see in the farming sector is, and I think as Michael said this morning, around producing pretty maps. Like on the last page there, I mean that's useless for a farmer ultimately. So you can't do anything with that unless you can actually start to then convert that into a file that can be then uploaded into your controller. So this is where the connectivity is really important. So increasingly these days, with contractors who've got machinery which is basically cloud-based, so ensuring you can load up the appropriate files that are required to spread fertiliser or lime to address those issues. You've got to make sure that you can you provide the support and the technology is functional, that can drive those processes, and that's why I think in this space increasingly, more people I think are looking at not being the proprietary sort of lockup of data, but I think taking a more sort of colour-blind or agnostic view. So no matter which brand or breed of whether you're driving a green or a red or a blue machine, and no matter which screen you're using, but being able to sort of talk to the different brands and breeds is increasingly important, so that you can things can be quite interchangeable, whether you've got a John Deere with a Topcon screen with a bridle spreader, but ensuring those bits of equipment can communicate with each other, and then for applications of fertiliser and so forth, that you can upload simple files and they just happen. So I think having the confidence is a big part to have a sort of a simple solution for farmers, and then I think once you're on your way in whatever the use case might be, then I guess again in confidence and away you go. So I just thought I'd run through some sort of just case studies. So once again, the far right hand side there, that paddock, where you might have applied 2.5 tonnes of lime per hectare off a single soil test, and then I think now through some greater intelligence anyway, and then some ground truthing with your agronomist and your own experience, you then start to interrogate the financial outcomes of what you actually did. So whether you targeted 5.2 or 5.5 as your pH level, and then applied your lime accordingly, you can start to see, I suppose, how much things vary in terms of the dollar value of lime you end up applying, so from zero in areas that are quite alkaline to significant applications of lime from up to 4 tonnes. So you can see here, I suppose this input use efficiency. So one of the benefits I think of this whole space is you end up applying potentially less lime than you otherwise would have done, but more importantly it's about allocation of resources. So you end up applying it where it's most required, and areas where it's not required, you can make quite a few savings. So I think there's some of those sort of use cases, and just testing the assumptions and then going back and measuring them is really important, I think, to gain confidence in this whole ag tech space as people move into it. And once again, probably just to sort of reaffirm that message, if you like. So if for farmers who continue to apply inputs on a blanket basis, and this is obviously this is evolving, but you can continue to see, if anything, things can only get worse. So areas that are being underlimed continue to reacidify, continue to impede productivity, your pasture growth's impeded, crop growth's impeded, yields drop, dollars fall away. So I think by not addressing the issues at the core, it once again comes down to collecting some quality data, be it with sensors or other means, and also conversely, areas that are high in pH, but that could be high in phosphorus, high in potassium, high in nitrogen. It doesn't matter, but the principle is basically the same. If you understand what you're working with through some more intense measurements, and then you can start to apply, make more informed decisions, if you like, and then reallocate your resources. Once again, whether it's fertiliser, ameliorants, fungicides, herbicides, but having more informed decisions only helps you, I guess, start to make those changes anyway. So that's actually almost me, Hugh, anyway. So it's really just I think probably our take-home messages, I suppose. Time and again, it's all about not chasing the technology. It's all about having some key strategies in mind, knowing what you're trying to achieve, whether it's you're trying to address drainage or soil nutrition or soil structure, but having an outcome in mind, taking the appropriate measurements through a range of sensors or other measurements to do so, and then ground truthing that to get an outcome. So, but at the end of the day, it's keeping it simple. Probably is our message anyway, and then I suppose hopefully gaining confidence as you do.